Uh, Good morning, and for some colleagues, I think it's afternoon already. So good morning, good afternoon, and good night, esteemed colleagues from the Asia Pacific region. It's my utmost pleasure to welcome you to this session on the proposal to amend Articles 7, 10, 11, and 22 of the Rotterdam Convention and to add a new Annex VIII, which is currently co-sponsored by Australia, Burkina Faso, Colombia, Georgia, Ghana, Mali, Nigeria, and Republic of Maldives and Switzerland. My name is Hassan. I'm from the Maldives Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Technology. I would also like to introduce my colleague, Ms. Nicola Powell, from the Australian Government, Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment, and Water. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the BRS Secretariat for organizing this webinar, and I thank you all for taking the time to join us for the discussion today. To help clarify the proposed changes of this proposal, we will begin this webinar with a short explanatory video followed by a detailed presentation from my colleague, Ms. Nicola Powell. We hope that this presentation and the ensuing discussions will help in enhancing your understanding of the proposed amendment proposal. So now I give floor to the Secretary to please present the video. Thank you.
Secretariat, I'm not getting any sound on the video.
Yeah, me too. I'm not able to.
Yeah, the sound doesn't appear to be working. I'm not sure the Secretariat can hear us. I'll just put a message in the chat. Oh.
Excuse me, Nicola, could you please
Yes.
present because yeah.
Hello?
Yes, was there an issue with the display of the video?
Yes, we couldn't, there was no sound.
No sound?
No sound, yeah.
Okay.
There's no audio there.
Okay, so let me check quickly. Thank you for this information. Apologies.
Thank you.
Still no audio, I'm afraid.
You're still not hearing the sound? Oh, very sorry. We'll just check with one colleague. Apologies.
The chemicals industry is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. There are over 350,000 chemicals circulating in the global economy. The aim of the Rotterdam Convention is to share the responsibility for managing international trade in certain hazardous chemicals. It empowers importing countries to decide whether to accept chemical imports and under what conditions, and requires exporting countries to respect those decisions. The foundation of the Convention is information sharing to enable sound decision-making. The major provisions of the Convention are triggered when a chemical is listed in Annex VIII. A chemical is listed in Annex III of the Convention when two parties from two different regions have taken action to ban or severely restrict the chemical. The Convention's Chemical Review Committee confirms that the basis for those actions meets the Convention criteria. And the COP agrees to list the chemical in Annex III. This listing process has worked well, but unforeseen circumstances have prevented listing of some chemicals, despite the majority of parties wanting to do so. This undermines the implementation of the Convention and limits the ability of parties to better control imports of hazardous substances. In May 2023, the COP will be asked to consider a proposal to amend the Convention text to create a new annex in which chemicals can be listed if agreement to list them on Annex III cannot be reached. How will the amendments work in practice? The amendments to the Convention text, creating the new Annex VIII and associated obligations, will only apply to those parties that ratify the amended Convention. The process for listing chemicals in Annex III will remain the same for all parties to the Convention. If the COP agrees to list the chemical in Annex III, there is no need to discuss an Annex VIII listing. If the COP cannot agree to list a chemical in Annex III, the parties to the amended Convention can decide to list the chemical in Annex VIII instead. Preferably, this decision will be taken by consensus. But if this isn't possible, it can be taken by a 3/4 majority vote. Parties to the amended Convention will be able to export any Annex VIII chemical to another party only if an import response has been transmitted. So let's recap. Looking at the COP decision process for listings, if the amendments are adopted and once they enter into force. The Chemical Review Committee recommends a chemical for listing in Annex III. The COP agrees to list the chemical in Annex III. All pre-existing processes and obligations for Annex III chemicals apply. Or, the COP cannot agree to list the chemical in Annex III. Parties to the amended Convention agree, by consensus or 3/4 majority, to list the chemical in Annex VIII. The decision and the decision guidance document are transmitted to all parties. An importing party must provide its import response before any Annex VIII chemical can be exported to them. The chemical remains on the COP agenda for a future decision on listing in Annex III. What are the benefits of the proposed amendment? It provides an additional tool for some countries facing difficulties with managing unwanted shipments of hazardous chemicals. It will help countries to take domestic action, to either manage the import of a chemical or not allow the import. It retains the aim of sharing responsibility for sound management of chemicals. It builds on existing Convention processes, which will remain unchanged, including listing chemicals in Annex III by consensus. We hope you can support this proposal, and by doing so, support the continuing success of the Rotterdam Convention.
Thank you, Secretariat. If I could ask you to go to the third slide, please. Thank you. With over 350,000 chemicals circulating in the global economy, the aim of the Rotterdam Convention is to enable countries to make informed decisions through an information sharing process. And its main goal is to share the responsibility for managing the international trade in certain hazardous chemicals. This allows parties to decide whether or not to accept certain chemical imports and under what conditions. And exporting countries are required to respect those conditions. Exporting parties must obtain permission, known as prior informed consent, from an importing party before they can export any chemical listed in Annex III. The Rotterdam Convention does not ban the manufacture, use, or trade of chemicals. Next slide, please. The major provisions of the Convention are triggered when a chemical is listed in Annex III. And the process for listing most of the chemicals begins when one or more parties in two or more regions notify the Secretariat that they have taken final regulatory action on a chemical, meaning they have either banned or severely restricted the chemical. The Secretariat then reviews the information provided by these regions, and if it meets the information requirements outlined in Annex I, the Secretariat forwards the information to the Chemical Review Committee, the CRC, for their assessment against the criteria for listing outlined in Annex II. If the CRC determines the Annex II criteria have been met, it recommends to the Conference of the Parties that the chemical should be listed in Annex III. And finally, the COP decides whether to include the chemical in Annex III. Next slide, please. The Convention has worked really well for the 54 chemicals currently listed. Unfortunately, however, the COP has not been able to agree to list some chemicals, despite the Chemical Review Committee finding that they meet all the listing criteria and recommending them for listing. Some parties are opposing the listings because these chemicals are still needed in their countries or are still exported by their countries, even though the chemicals listed in Annex III can still be traded as long as prior informed consent has been obtained from the importing party. When the COP cannot agree to list a chemical that has been recommended for listing by the CRC, it undermines the Convention by eroding confidence in the listing process, limiting information sharing, and the ability of parties to control imports of hazardous substances. Next slide, please. So what is the proposal? The proposal is to create a new annex to the Convention, Annex VIII. If the COP cannot agree to list a chemical in Annex III, despite the CRC having recommended the chemical for listing, parties to the amended Convention may propose its listing in Annex VIII. The amendments will establish the process for listing a chemical in Annex VIII and give effect to the rights and obligations arising from that listing. This new annex is a means for importing parties to benefit from the prior informed consent process and the information provided in the decision guidance document, pending consideration of that chemical's listing in Annex III. If the COP decides to adopt the proposal, parties to the Convention will have the opportunity to ratify the amendment. Next slide, please. So how will the proposed Annex VIII work? Well, the process for listing chemicals in Annex III will remain the same for all parties to the Convention. And if the COP agrees to list a chemical in Annex III, there's no need to discuss a listing in Annex VIII. However, if the COP cannot agree to list a chemical in Annex III, the parties to the amended Convention can consider listing the chemical in Annex VIII. And preferably, this decision would be taken by consensus, but it could be taken by a 3/4 majority vote if consensus could not be reached. Once a chemical is listed in Annex VIII, all the parties to the amended Convention would be bound by the obligations relating to Annex VIII, and the chemical could not be exported without explicit prior informed consent from the importing party. Importantly, chemicals listed in Annex VIII will still be considered for listing in Annex III and will remain before the COP for a future decision on that. There would be no changes in the procedures for chemicals already listed in Annex III, or for any chemical the COP agrees in the future to list in Annex III. The proposed amendments do not affect the operations of the CRC, nor its review and recommendations to the COP in accordance with Articles 5 to 7 of the Convention. Next slide, please. This matrix shows the obligations of the parties relative to whether they had ratified the amendment or not. I think for most situations it is fairly straightforward. If a exporting party and an importing party have both ratified, or if the exporting party and the importing party have both not ratified. The only situation where it becomes more complex is in a situation when the importing party has ratified the amendment and the exporting party has not ratified. And you can see that in the bottom left square there, where it talks about the importing party is bound by Article 10 and the exporting party is not bound by Article 11. The outcome of that would be that the listing process and the availability of information through the decision guidance document would still enable the importing party to assess the potential risks of the chemical and take action to manage its import through its national frameworks and policies. Can we move to the next slide, please? So what are the benefits of the proposed amendment? Well, the Rotterdam Convention provides an early warning system for countries to help protect themselves against certain hazardous chemicals moving in international trade. The proposal will extend this system to help countries facing difficulties with managing unwanted shipments of hazardous chemicals. It will help countries to take domestic action to manage hazardous chemicals, and in particular, whether to allow the import of a chemical or not to allow the import. It retains the aim of sharing responsibility for sound management of chemicals, and it builds on existing convention processes, which will remain unchanged, including the process for listing chemicals in Annex III by consensus. Next slide, please. You can find the links to the proposal, the explanatory video that you just saw, and a brochure on the Rotterdam website if you follow the links on the page here highlighted in green. Thank you. I think if we can move to the next slide, yes, we will open the floor to any questions.
Thank you very much, Nicola. So the floor is open, colleagues, for any questions that you might have on this amendment proposal.
Oops. I think I just put my hand up accidentally. Secretariat, will we be able to see? I'm not sure if I can see whether people have their hands up. I think now I can.
I don't see any hands. Maybe no one wants to break the ice.
I think that might be right, Hassan. I think nobody wants to break the ice. perhaps while we're waiting for people to think about whether they have any questions, I might just point out that if you are interested in becoming a co-sponsor of the proposal, you can contact Michelle Sheeran, and the email address is there on the screen. Michelle is with the Swiss government. And I would also like to add that to become a co-sponsor has no legal or financial implications. It is just a signal that a party supports the proposal, a strong signal.
I think we can discuss more at the regional meeting as well, right? So,
Yes, thank you, Hassan.
yeah.
And I think Hassan and I will both be there at the
Yeah.
regional meeting in Bangkok next week, and I certainly will be present at that meeting from Wednesday morning right through Wednesday and Thursday, and I would very much welcome an opportunity, as I'm sure Hassan would as well, and we'd be very happy to talk to people together in the sidelines of that meeting.
Yeah.
And hope to be able to deliver a presentation again on the Thursday morning, I believe, when the item will be discussed on the agenda. It's perhaps much easier to discuss in person. It's always a little bit difficult, isn't it?
Absolutely.
A webinar. Yeah.
And also, I think due to the time difference, some of the colleagues were not able to join. So,
yes, indeed.
yeah.
Well, what do you think? Should we give it just another minute or so to see if anyone wants to be brave and raise their hand? Otherwise, we may close the session if there are no questions. Let's give it 1 minute.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that message in the chat. I'm just going to that. Thank you very much. Lebanon, I think it was. Oh, I think I can see a hand up actually. Sorry, I'm just changing my view. I think I can see a hand up from, is it Amir?
Yeah, Amir.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Amir, and I am a focal point of Rotterdam Convention, Iraqi's focal point of Rotterdam Convention. Thank you for your presentation about the proposal, and thank you to invite Iraq to participate in this meeting. Actually, we study the proposal and we have some concern about the proposal. If you allow me.
Please.
Yeah, as we know that the principles of Rotterdam Convention, when we want to include the new chemicals, as you clarify in the presentation, it's in Annex VIII, depend on consent all parties. And Iraq and all parties become party in this convention regarding to this annex actually. And it's too important Yeah, we know that it's not easy to achieve this. From my experience, I participate in maybe 5 COPs, 3 or 4 COPs, and we saw the difficult to consent about new chemicals or pesticide in Annex 3. And maybe if we added a new annex, for example, Annex VIII, it will be make more effective of the convention. But we actually have concern about maybe if it is possible, the Annex VIII will be way or window to passing and addition new chemicals without taking all necessary to step to procedure or convince all the parties. And I don't know, maybe the Annex 3, it will become from history or its second annex. And the second one, if there is 2 annex dealing with the chemicals, for example, Annex 3 and Annex 8, it will be divided. And as we know that the parties not consent about the chemicals in Annex 8, it's not obligation to these chemicals. It will be divide the parties to groups, and I think it create more confusion in the convention. In highlight, we suggest that we should reformulating the proposal to avoid concern about Iraq, and we saw some countries, they have also concerning about this amendment. More discussion and dialogue with the parties. We suggest, we encourage about this way to convince and to reach to proposal, convince to all parties, because as mentioned before, that we are become party in this convention regarding to the condition of the Annex 3, and it's the soul of the convention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, for those questions, or those comments rather, Amir. I think those are some very good points, and they're points that have been raised by some in the formal submissions to the Secretariat. I might just attempt to address some of those, Hassan, if that's all right with you?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So perhaps I might just address one element that I heard in your comments first about creating 2 parallel processes. I think it's actually not the case that it will create a parallel process, because the option for listing a chemical in Annex 8 will only come into play when a proposal to list in Annex 3 is not agreed. And the listing in Annex 8 is only effective until the chemical is listed in Annex 3. The procedure leading up to a decision to list in Annex 8 is the procedure used for listing in Annex 3. So that up until that point, it is the same procedure. And the COP would continue to consider the recommendation to list in Annex 3 at subsequent meetings, which I think goes to another element of your comments about the Annex 8 making Annex 3 redundant, or perhaps that it would become the preferred pathway. That's not the intention. The primary objective would still be to list chemicals in Annex 3, and that would always be considered first. The option of listing in Annex 3 would only come into play if listing in Annex 3 cannot be agreed. And I'm just trying to think if there was another element of your question. I think you you also mentioned the consensus-based decision-making process, which I think is an important element of the Rotterdam Convention, and obviously it has been a feature of this convention since it came into force. I think consensus decision-making has been very important in many contexts in international treaties, and indeed wherever possible we should always strive to find consensus. But there are occasions on which those parties who wish to make progress should be able to do so without a small number of parties preventing that progress. Several multilateral environmental agreements do provide for voting in relation to amendments to specific annexes. For example, the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants and the Convention on Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And those annexes actually relate to measures to ban the manufacture or use or trade in those things listed, which is quite a more significant measure that comes into play when those things are listed, and yet they still have a voting provision available when consensus can't be reached. And I think it's also important to note that the presence of provisions or allowing for voting in decision making can often stimulate efforts to reach consensus. I think I've covered most of the elements, if not all. Hassan, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, Nicole, I think you have comprehensively addressed the queries. And also I wanted to highlight that listing will still be subject to Chemical Review Committee, which is the scientific body, subsidiary body assigned for reviewing this chemical. So it will still undergo rigorous scientific evaluation, whether it goes to Annex 3 or 8. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. And I'm not sure if there were any other hands up.
And also, I think one colleague asked how to become a co-sponsor in the chat, so maybe we could answer to that.
Oh, terrific. Okay. Yes. Would you like to go ahead with that, Hassan?
So we contact in the presentation, it's mentioned an email address. So it is Michelle, right? Michelle, I think that we can provide the email address, right? So
it is, I think, hopefully it's on my screen. So hopefully it's
yes,
on the screen there for all the participants on the slide there, in the middle of the body of water.
Yeah.
There was a question in the chat or a suggestion that says it might be worthwhile to explain again the situation with when one party is bound by Annex VIII and another is not. I'm happy to do that. If we can perhaps, if I could ask the Secretariat to go back to the slide which has the matrix, the table of where that's forward one. Yep, that's it there. Okay. So hopefully this table is easy to follow, and this table is also a part of the brochure that I mentioned earlier that is published available through the Rotterdam Convention website. When you go to the in the Convention tab and you go to the amendment proposals, and then you can find on the main page there a description, and there are links to the brochure and the video if you want to watch the video again and download the brochure. This matrix is available there so you can study it at your leisure and in more detail. Here we can see that on the top with a horizontal axis you can see that the importing party, and then on on the vertical axis, you can see the exporting party. And when it's the same for both importing, exporting, that they have either ratified Annex VIII or not ratified Annex VIII, it's fairly straightforward. When in a situation where the importing party has ratified Annex VIII and the exporting party has not, that's when it can be a little bit more complicated. And you can see in the bottom left square of the matrix there that it says the importing party is bound by Article 10, so the obligations for importing parties, but the exporting party is not bound by Article 11, which is where all the obligations for exporting parties are outlined. The outcome of that is really that it then becomes the onus of the importing party to take action through their national legal frameworks and policies. But the idea is that they benefit from the information available to them in the decision guidance document to be able to make that decision, the best decision for their national interests. I hope that that explains it. Oh, I'm sorry. I was having trouble hearing that intervention. Was someone trying to make an intervention there? Okay. Perhaps it was a mistake. Thank you to Philip for pointing out that there's another hand up, but I am afraid I cannot see the hand. Hassan, can you see who has their hand up?
Yeah, I also cannot see. Maybe. Yes. I think Russian is language, right? I can't read that. Is it Ahako? Could you please take the floor? Maybe Secretariat would need to unmute the delegate. Yeah, it's working now. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation. We will discuss the proposal with the decision makers in my government. Earlier, we sent our position and the proposal presented by Australia, Switzerland, and Mali aims to establish a new Annex VIII, a chemical for which there is no consensus to list in Annex III, could be introduced by a three-fourths major vote. The consensus, which is fundamental principle, would be undermined. The convention is the result of a balanced set of provisions agreed by parties as a unit. Our government adhered to the position that is inappropriate to adopt a new Annex VIII. We have not found a concrete justification for the expedience of adopting Annex VIII. So we will discuss more this proposal and make decision in Switzerland in May. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. I think I will try something different just to see if I can see other hands. I'm afraid my Australian government computer system does not like WebEx as a format. It is very difficult to use on my computer, I'm afraid. I cannot see any more hands. Please let me know, anyone, if you are seeing hands. Of course, Hassan, if you can see a hand, let me know.
Yeah, I don't see any hands.
Okay.
Could we please get the last intervention? Was it from Russia or Ukraine? Because it was another language, so we were not able to
Yes,
read. Yeah.
yes.
Could the delegate
Thank
please
you.
introduce?
Could we please ask the delegate who gave the last intervention to just advise which country you are speaking from?
Republic of Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, Hassan, shall we do one more minute of
Yeah,
pause to see?
let's see if there are other more new hands. Yeah, I don't see any new hands yet, so maybe we can wait for a minute and then
Certainly.
conclude. Yeah.
Well, it is a lovely evening here in Canberra, in the Australia's capital, and so if we finish the webinar earlier, I will be very pleased to go out for a walk outside of my building before presenting at the next webinar. I think that might be it, Hassan. I think we might close the session.
Yeah.
Would you like to give some closing remarks, Hassan?
Yeah. So before closing, I just would like to thank you all the colleagues for your interest and time and for the very valuable discussions that you made. So as we mentioned before, if you would like to join as a co-sponsor, please contact the email address which is shown there in this slide. So we'll be very happy to work further. So thank you very much. And we hope to see you in the regional meeting in Bangkok.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you to the
Thank
Secretariat
you.
again for the the webinar, and thank you, colleagues, for attending. I hope to see you all next week in Bangkok.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.